All right, hello everyone. Today we have a small video about the items one should steer clear of after dry fasting. So we see a lot of nonsense, but a lot of videos suggesting foods, ways of reintroducing them that are completely outlandish, even from supposed experts. We'll explain that a little. But prior to that, the news for the year 2026 is that the retreats restart near the end of April, early May, so the retreat at Costa Brava is beginning to get booked. So I just returned from Colombia. We did our winter dry fast. It was a small group, but fasting in very hot countries at 40 degrees is totally possible, so we managed to experiment with a dry fast under conditions that are extremely hot yet humid, so completely doable in the region where we were located in the Caribbean area. That's right. So I didn't make testimonials because I was traveling light, so very few means we didn't have all the devices for maintenance, for stimulating energy, all that all that wasn't there. So it was a soft travel version in a nation outside of Europe. So this was our first time traveling beyond Europe. So that's it. The next retreat is scheduled for May. So for anyone interested, please do not hesitate to come. After that, it continues with the classic summer retreat and also a beginner's retreat for those wanting to start to come do something softer, gentler, easier for beginners at the beginning of August, the 1st of August, I think. There you go. And then afterwards, we head back as usual to Montenegro at the end of late September. I think it's late September this year. We moved it so we could have sunshine and be able to swim. So we shifted the dates slightly to ensure. There you go. Beautiful weather still in late September, which is the case in Montenegro. So that's the news. I'll remind you about the books. So when I mentioned the flagship books, these are books grounded in experience and practice. It's not like you see with some individuals, people who write about fasting and dry fasting who have never fasted themselves or who have only done one fast and then wrote about it, which is the case for several people. These books are based on experience, coaching, and practice truly, and this is the English version. Dry Fasting Revolution. And this part, this is the last book. We'll get there. The Dry Fasting Revolution in French. So these are reference guides. You will find a good amount of information on the refeeding process, on how to perform a dry fast. These books are genuinely practical, so this is really for those who wish to explore. Into fasting, you really have explanations, although this certainly doesn't replace an on-site retreat with holistic coaching like we do. But you still have theoretical information in there. And practical tools for if you want to try short dry fasts. I always repeat, avoid long dry fasts when you have pathologies, because you risk making errors and potentially facing subsequent problems afterward, which is not the objective. There you go. So today we will discuss the errors we primarily observe on YouTube and the internet, even from people who claim to be experts in the field, who have also published. We'll touch on a few words because there are things to say about how we see these people doing the reintroductions. So the food reintroduction is the most important part. So if you mess up this part, well, what will appear is a regeneration process that will be less successful. You will experience subsequent fatigue, you will have inflammation, and you won't truly reach the root of the problem you want to treat. If it pertains to a health concern, a recovery, or an improvement, there you go. Prevention, well, there you go. It's prevention, no problem. We approach it that way. There you go. How we conceive of it in a gentle, preventive manner. Even 3 days are already excellent in terms of preventive level. If the refeeding is properly managed, if we maintain ketosis afterward, we definitely see interesting effects. We've had people on retreats who came and did the 3 days. They continued with a perfect, well-managed, very gentle reintroduction while maintaining ketosis. And we observe that we get very, very good outcomes even just from 3 days of dry fasting followed by an excellent reintroduction. We truly see results that are quite interesting. There you go. So the problems appear, well, those who make mistakes, who make errors, the foods that are not adapted. There you go. So digestive issues often arise. There might be circulatory problems, pains that can surface in some individuals, uncontrolled cravings, uncontrolled, meaning people who choose the wrong food. This mainly stems from carbohydrate reintroductions. We don't do that as much now because we were somewhat following the model Russian in order to progress, and I immediately noticed that this model was not functioning properly, that there were digestive problems, that it wasn't working, the carbohydrate intakes were not working. I realized this very quickly, and we discontinued everything. And now we are truly focused on the most refined reintroductions, taking care even of the kind of vegetables provided, ensuring there are no anti-nutrients present, no lectins, no male liver, there must not be. It is an entire list. We have truly established the most appropriate exit strategy possible following dry fasts. Therefore, the primary principle is to always avoid sugars and carbohydrates following dry fasts. This is a foundational law that everyone should now adopt. To avoid those addiction problems that can immediately return, like fast available carb products after dry fasts, even liquids, we don't do that anymore. Which are counterproductive, which will instantly halt ketosis, which will immediately spike insulin levels and subsequently cause inflammation if you are suffering from candidiasis. It will start again very quickly, which is really not at all suitable. So if you have a helicobacter or certain bacteria feeding mainly on carbs, you reactivate them very, very easily. That's really not the goal. The goal really isn't that. The goal is to extinguish them. So if we can do a bit of ketosis afterward to prolong the fast's effects and avoid an immediate insulin spike on exit, it's all benefit. Also digestively, when you bring in carbs, they are very hard for humans to digest. Thus, it constitutes a metabolic shock to ingest carbohydrates immediately. It is a stress that rapidly occurs. Therefore, giving carbohydrates upon exiting a fast, whether they are juices or solids, is truly an error in my view. So we avoid it. So that all that can lead to this famous refeeding syndrome we try to avoid, which constitutes an unsuitable diet that can generate stress in both liquid and solid forms. So there you go. Many people we see resume eating completely blindly with bizarre foods, unsuitable liquids, which will create stress on the digestive system, which will create a physiological metabolic stress that will then block all regeneration. That will happen behind that. I remind you, we don't need sugar, we don't need carbs. To replenish reserves quickly, all of that can. Those who want to cut ketosis afterward, it can be done later, but I operate on the principle that we must leave at least 3 days a little bit in ketosis during refeeding, and then if people want to cut ketosis, they can reintroduce carbohydrates afterward. I have no problem. At least 3 days is the minimum without carbohydrates. That's the minimum we can do. Afterwards, some people continue this longer to get the maximum effect because the fast is short, it is shortened. So if we can extend it a bit to have a slightly longer ketosis effect, to have a more curative, more therapeutic effect, we just have to slightly increase the distance from ketosis and then we do something very, very gentle on the exit. We don't immediately create, there you go, that metabolic shock with the arrival of carbohydrates to immediately resume the fuel change. So it's a fuel change that is too fast for me. It's good to immediately assimilate food that is always ketogenic, mimicking the fast to make it gentle. There you go. So after a dry fast, the body isn't neutral, it's in a special state, so we have few digestive enzymes. The intestinal linings are extremely sensitive, which means that if you give them really foods that are too heavy, like carbohydrates in general, it will induce stress. So we attempt to acclimatize the digestive system using foods that are as digestible as possible. And we know very well that carbs are something heavy that will require much more digestive work than a light protein and then a vegetable, for example. There you go. Consequently, insulin is excessively reactive following a dry fast, so the smallest amount of sugar you consume will immediately trigger a rather significant insulin response. This is why we truly avoid it. Carb products, even low carb after a dry fast, we don't do that. There, it's a mistake we see everywhere. We will detail the foods a bit, but we see it everywhere. We really try to pay attention to the microbiota which was modified during the dry fast. We have an impoverishment of the intestinal flora, so the pathogenic bacteria have really been extinguished or even eradicated. Only a layer of healthy bacteria remains that could resist and is valid, and then we will restart this digestive system with adapted foods to be able to have the most abundant microbiota possible and the least inflammatory possible. There you go. So we try to continue our famous ketosis in breaking the dry fast with specific foods. So we avoid coconut water that you see a lot online, like you need minerals, you need to bring them in immediately. Now, I'd say coconut water is fine if it's from coconuts we got, for example, in Colombia, we had a lot of coconuts. Coconut water, for instance, during refeeding, if you've done, say, 3 days of refeeding, if you take coconut water after 3 or 4 days, I think it's very, very good. But not immediately, like some people do, especially one person in the United States who immediately goes for coconut water. I recently saw a refeeding done at his place where the very first food was coconut water. No, we absolutely do not do that because it's truly a metabolic stress. It's sugar after all, and we don't do that. It's really one of the mistakes we see everywhere. The first drink should mainly be liquids, restructured liquids. I won't go into all the details, but they are restructured liquids. It's water, it's inert, it's not calories, it's not carbohydrates. So, during the refeeding process, it is crucial to avoid that insulin spike and the resulting stress, digestive. So you need to manage the fuel switch when moving from a ketogenic diet, which was the state during the fast, meaning a fuel source based on beta hydroxybutyrate. And since you are in ketosis, if you continue in that state, upon exiting, you have something very gentle, very soft. So the first error involves fruit juices and vegetable juices, especially if you include vegetables high in lectins. With oxalates or any juice, all of that causes a secondary stress. You then have not just the sugars, but also the anti-nutrients, which will really cause damage to the lining of the mucosa, so we really avoid that. Sugary foods, well, there you go. That which cooked or raw, it doesn't matter. We also avoid honeys and similar things. All that is very detrimental, causing stress, metabolic stress that is too high. So now in dry fast centers, even water fasts, this applies to water fasts too, they have truly adopted a nutrition plan that resumes the principles of ketosis, where we continue with foods that will not cause subsequent insulin spikes. Well, that is vital. So this is the most frequent mistake we see really with blood sugar rising too fast, with that insulin spike creating inflammation, immediately causing fatigue, immediately creating cravings hours later because sugar calls for sugar. So a refeeding on sugar of any kind makes no sense. So the problem isn't necessarily the sugar itself, but the timing, the dose, and the metabolic context that interferes actually. There you go. So we also understand cereals. People who think of consuming cereals quickly in this sense, that's also a mistake. Humans are not built to consume. The human being fundamentally, millions of years ago, we didn't have cereals, they didn't exist, so we were all more or less in ketosis. We ate meat. There were vegetables, a few fruits that remained, but it's a different context. Now, we are talking about a dry fast context. There is a precise diet to follow in refeeding if we want to ensure results. We saw this because we tested the sugary beverages upon exiting at that time, the Russian model we see. Well, we realized it wasn't great, it wasn't necessarily optimal. We had some minor digestive issues, it wasn't right. And once we removed all that, we saw the difference. It was quite impressive. So we clearly see that the carbohydrate products, carbohydrate drinks, should absolutely not be given upon exiting a dry fast based on experience. And then we saw the fasters afterward who followed that model, and suddenly they had no more problems upon exiting. We are on a very refined model for refeeding. There you go. So we also see this mistake a lot. Sugary drinks, carbohydrate drinks given quickly to people doing short fasts, whether 2, 3, 4 days. Well, that's really something to eliminate. I would say for any type of fast, but no, it's not bringing in carbohydrates really to avoid that insulin spike, that inflammatory spike. It's an immediate shock because sugar calls for sugar, so you have insulin calling for insulin, and then you always have the craving, the craving, the craving. And there you go, that's not the solution. You really create problems based on experience by giving carbohydrate products immediately. We must really avoid that. So there you go. So the first mistake is all of that. So the problem with sugar also involves fructose, so we truly avoid that, which is, well, fruits in principle are generally low in acid, but depending on the type, if we consume too much, there you go, you have to be careful. You have to monitor the yams. In any case, we really avoid fruits. They can lead to bloating and gas. It's something we know well, at least in the first few days. I'd say wait a minimum of 3 or 4 days after refeeding before taking a fruit if you want to break ketosis. Fruits, there's no problem, we can have some. I'm not a fruit fanatic. But I take low glycemic fruits, passion fruit, blueberries, raspberries, things like that. That and of course lemons, things like that. There's no issue with that. So the thing is, fruit isn't bad, but the quantity and timing when you eat it coming out, that's what will cause problems. Second element, we return to all cereal products like rice, even gluten-free rice. We avoid it because coming out of a dry fast, we often have poor chewing. We need to let the body recover a bit from the stress of the dry fast. So the enzymes gradually return, but we shouldn't immediately introduce large doses of carbohydrates, especially cereals, which require a lot of chewing, much salivary amylase, in order to digest all of that. Consequently, we lack these resources immediately after a dry fast, so we must allow the body to regenerate its enzymes somewhat. Therefore, the assimilation capacity is restricted. coming out of a dry fast, so we watch out for that. Assimilation is not yet established, so it is truly necessary to be careful. The body isn't necessarily ready. So the possible result, as I said, is a sugar spike, slow digestion, so inflammation, etc. We recall all that. Then another error we observe involves milk-based kefir products. This is a casein which is pro-inflammatory to the mucous membranes, so we truly avoid that. So in Russia, they have this whole culture of kefir and all that. Well, it can be good otherwise, it's fine, but we don't give that coming out of a dry fast, which will cause metabolic stress on the mucous membranes, and then casein is pro-inflammatory, so it will really degrade the intestine significantly. We avoid truly kefir-based products. Coming out of a dry fast, we often see these mistakes being spread everywhere. So dairy products introduce mucus, leading to catarrh. Thus, the dry fast is truly paramount for elimination. If you suffer from chronic sinusitis, if you have a blocked nose, if you have mucus in your body, the dry fast will rapidly break it down via autophagy. You will genuinely cleanse the mucosal linings within your body. If afterwards you put mucus back with dairy products, it's really not good. So here we wait. Afterwards, we can give something based on casein 2, rather other types of animals that are closer to humans. I am rather in favor of that in doses that are reasonable. In any case, the Holstein cow and other dairy cow varieties should truly be avoided. We do not want casein that is really inflammatory on the intestinal mucous membranes. So on fragile membranes coming out, we really avoid all that. Yes, then there are forces of nature, people who can manage everything. They will do that and it will more or less be fine. Yes, even with carbohydrate-rich foods, some people will manage this and it will pass reasonably well. They won't perish or face major issues, but these are minor details. We truly aim to refine the professional aspect of nutrition and reintroduction of food to provide the correct approach, the most successful reintroduction possible, as this is what will lead to regeneration and work on the on the health as much as possible upon reintroduction. So we try to pay attention to all the small details. Yes. So the mistake we also see a lot is mixing fruits, cereals, dairy products, honey, seeds. So all of that should truly be avoided, such as, for example, porridge made with buckwheat or rice. Quinoa, you put that with maybe fruits with watermelons. You have that gentleman who was doing reintroductions with watermelons, all that. We avoid all that. Those are mistakes I made myself. I can speak about it. Well, we avoid that. It's very simple. Then, bad mixing with dairy products, honey. When you mix all these reintroduction errors together, it's really something to abolish. The seeds, all that is not superfoods, it creates digestive stress. There are other types of animals we give if we immediately want to remineralize afterwards to bring in micronutrients. There is everything necessary. It's not that, yes. So I won't go into all the details of what to reintroduce. That's not the goal of the video. It was really to talk about what not to do. Really. The mistakes that we see conveyed by certain people. So there you go. Then the anti-nutrients. We must be careful, as certain categories of vegetables are not suitable for human beings and will create stress on the digestive mucous membranes. So there is a list. We need to be cautious and avoid certain kinds of vegetables that are rather irritating for the digestive linings, as they will be abrasive to the membranes. So that will result in side effects. So we must genuinely avoid that. Then the error we see the most is the lack of chewing from people who are left to themselves. It's true that they are not rationed because we ration a bit in the fasts, not an open bar where you can go ahead, serve yourselves, and do whatever you wish. There's a specific quantity provided, and that is the extent of the food allowance, spread out between the group. And these aren't the wild parties I witnessed in the past. I wouldn't want to be there, but it was scary. There you see he left, built on food. It was rather worrying to see. So we are not at all in that pattern here. We truly advocate for conscious eating involving mastication, and mastication begins in the mouth. It involves the salivary amylase, the digestive enzymes present in the mouth. It starts right there. So eating too fast brings on bad digestion right away, causing fermentation, intestinal overload, and the resulting fatigue whenever you don't digest properly. So that's the fatigue that follows. That's why if you have few meals, very digestible meals, you immediately manage to fix chronic fatigue. Most chronic fatigue people have is from maldigestion. So people don't know a good food supplement, whereas it's simply an excess of foods that fail to be metabolized, that cannot be assimilated, that are not delivered to the blood or the cells. So it's mainly an overload of toxins also. Afterwards there is sleep, but primarily it is bad digestion. There you go. Another mistake we see a lot is too much liquid. Sending this video of this gentleman, a doctor, it was in the United States. So this guy gorged himself. He drank almost 1 liter, and it's not even coconut water. It was water. Yes, it was coconut water, but in bulk, which means it's pasteurized. So that's not great because you're going to remove all the bacteria. So if things are pasteurized, those are things to really avoid. There you go. And also the speed when you drink a liter all at once like that because you are thirsty, well, there you create what we call the famous overfeeding syndrome, too much liquid coming in. There's an order, there's a quantity for liquids we should follow. I don't know who needs to know. And when you see that, it gives you the shivers because drinking like that, liters at a time after a week, I don't know, it's quite alarming. So we must not do that. There are specific amounts to respect to avoid metabolic stress, physiological, and then you succeed in your fast. There you go. So drinking too much also dilutes the digestive juices. If the person eats again later, digestion is very compromised. So that will disrupt the entire internal physiological balance, the electrolytes, etc., etc. So the most important thing is to work with liquids, water at the beginning, to structure them and work on them. There are things to know about that. There you go. So we listen to our body. We are progressive. We avoid excesses of all kinds. There you go. Another mistake we see, well, it was the gentleman concerned. They were taking salt, sodium, saying salt is needed. We lost salt to prevent edema. It's the exact reverse of what should happen. So based on experience, I've had numerous people contact me following accidents, following, I don't know what it was, the press. The mistake we saw was the reintroduction of salted water. So salt immediately upon reintroducing the fast. So if you want to get edema, drink salted water. You will quickly get edema. So this is one of the main stupid things we see. People think, and we lost a lot of salt. We need salt. There you go. And that, well, you will end up creating edema and people swell up, swelling everywhere. That is, there you go, something really to avoid these reintroductions with sodium. So there you go, a person who writes books on fasting. It's quite worrying to see how these people do the reintroductions. It's a little frightening. There you go. Regarding other food items, we should also avoid. So this refeeding syndrome is very real. So we also avoid foods that are too fatty, those that are inappropriate. So we don't take butter, we don't take red meat, foods that are too heavy. Even protein is good, but there are protein categories, protein molecular structures that need awareness. We don't administer just any protein when breaking a dry fast. There are specific things precise that must be given. It's a science, there you go, to be able to support people, to give there you go, foods that are the most suitable for the person. Then there is also a matter of individuality. We look at that aspect. So there you go. So you really have to pay attention to this refeeding syndrome. But refeeding syndrome, it occurs. We know where this refeeding syndrome problem comes from. It's always the same thing. It's an excess of carbohydrates. Usually it's sugars, carbohydrates of all kinds. It's an excess in volume, the quantities, either too much liquid or too much solid. A reintroduction without chewing where the digestive enzymes couldn't assimilate. That's why we ration. There are small quantities. There you go. So too rapid a reintroduction. Those are the 3 points of the refeeding syndrome. There you go. So if you are aware of these 3 points, you avoid quite a few problems. But most of these people have never pushed on these specific areas, and that's why you see a bit of anything on YouTube, reintroductions that are a bit done, a bit haphazardly. There you go. So that's not the way. If you truly want success in your therapeutic dry fast, you really need to have precision about how you do it, how you regain your mindset when you do that. There's an order for food intake. We avoid carbs first. It's not done haphazardly. There is a specific sequence you must follow regarding when you consume them. And this sequence is not intended for daily routines. I strongly advise adhering to this specific dietary order. So the process of refeeding involves taking small sips. It is a way to do it, a procedure, about preparing liquids and so forth. We really try to get an effect as mild as possible during the body's rehydration and overall refeeding process. There you have it. That concludes this video. Fasting is not an achievement, it is a break, and the reintroduction is a reconstruction. Plus, the benefits of fasting can be extended through progressive and conscious steps. So the key element here is not about performance, but truly about the mindset, respecting the body and awareness. That's all. So I mentioned a few common errors I've observed. There are likely many other practices during reintroduction that I haven't noticed, as I can't monitor everything, but these were essentially the main errors, so to speak, that are visible. Ultimately, people are free to choose. I am merely offering my perspective. I am not an authority. People will do as they wish afterward. These are just my observations. I maintain that carbohydrate-heavy foods are definitely not the correct approach for breaking a fast, as they only lead to subsequent issues, and you must allow the body some time to recover before introducing them. Furthermore, there is a specific sequence and intelligence to how liquids should be consumed. It's not about immediately mineralizing as fast as possible. You must be certain about the food you are consuming, and naturally it should be as unprocessed as possible. And that it is something your body can assimilate, which you already know. So if you consume a food, for instance, after a 7-day dry fast, like fir resin, most people immediately feel the energy return. You recognize it as beneficial food that hasn't caused you stress and actually provides energy. You sense this reaction in your body. You test the food and quickly perceive whether it is being accepted or if it is causing disturbances or other issues. That indicates it won't be assimilated and will cause subsequent issues indeed. So it's really about listening to yourself, tranquility, and then there you go, really knowing what you are doing, understanding what you are doing. That concludes everything for today. I will see you soon for the next video. Bye bye.